Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. The Path of the Wind, the Tale of Fujin and Raijin. Part 1, The Breath Before the Storm. In the hush before names, the world rested like a sleeping drum. The sky had not yet learned its thunder. The sea had not yet remembered its songs, and the mountains stood with their heads bowed, dreaming of height. All was unbroken stillness, so complete that the silence itself felt like a vast, clear lake, holding stars that had not yet been lit. In that quiet, the first breath waited. It began as a shiver, a small thing, lighter than a sigh, softer than the brush of a moth's wing against a lantern. The shiver became a thread, the thread became a string, and the string trembled across the skin of the world. A faint stir moved through the tall grasses of the first plains. Dew listened, stone listened, even darkness itself leaned closer, as if to hear the sound a seed makes when it remembers it will one day be a tree. From this tremble, Fujin formed, neither born nor made but gathered, the way mist gathers above a river at dawn. He stepped from the seam between quiet and motion, hair unbound, garments flowing like the banners of autumn. In his hands, a sack of woven emptiness, light as breath, deep as horizon. He opened his eyes and the grasses bent, not from fear, but in greeting. For the world had missed the wind and did not know it had missed him until that moment. Fujin listened. He listened to the hollows inside mountains and to the hidden avenues between waves, to the small aching space between the heartbeats of sleeping birds. He learned the lengths and curves of all those spaces and smiled, because space is the invitation that motion has always been waiting for. When he loosened the mouth of his sack, a hush of wind slipped free, a first, tentative exhale. It traced silver paths across the dew, rippled the skins of resting ponds, and teased the edges of unfallen leaves. The world inhaled, surprised. Then it exhaled again. The rhythm of weather began. Yet breath alone does not wake a sky. To teach the vault above to speak, there must be a voice that can find it. When the first winds circled, they brushed the high, sleeping heavens and made of them a drum. Far to the east, beyond the rim of dawn, another presence stirred, heavier, rounder, carrying the gravity of rain clouds and the smile of summer heat. From coils of stormlight and the fathoms of silence beneath them, Raijin came forth. He arrived like a promise kept. Copper sparks played along his fingers. Around his waist hung drums of thunder. Their skins stretched from the night between lightning and echo. His hair flowed like black storm tides. His grin lifted the horizon, and in his laughter were the warm claps of sudden rain on thirsty soil. If Fujin was the road, Raijin was the traveler who knew how to drum a path across it. They regarded each other with the familiarity of forces that had been dreaming side by side inside the same stillness. One was the question, the other the answer, or perhaps one was the breath, the other the heart that made breath meaningful. Fujin gave a slight bow that moved the trees without touching them. Raijin thumped one drum with the pad of his thumb. Across the world, sleeping hills sat up a little straighter. "Brother," said Fujin, and the grasses leaned toward the word. "Shall we begin? Let's wake what wishes to wake," said Raijin, and his voice rumbled in the bones of the mountains. They stood upon the first empty shore where land met water without yet knowing how to greet it. The sea lay smooth, reflecting the sky's pale belly. The sky lay smooth, reflecting a sea without waves. Fujin took a measure of the air and let it go. A pale wind ran fingers through the water, raising small shivers to the surface. The sea blinked, surprised to find eyelids. Raijin listened to that blink and heard inside it the smallest absence, the tiny hollow that follows every blink and precedes every seeing. Into that hollow he placed a pulse. He beat it once, twice, and the sky answered. A low rolling echoed beyond the horizon, the very first thunder rehearsing its name. Everything remembers what it is, given the right invitation. The waves remembered their curve, their back arching and their fall. The clouds, once mere pale blankets, remembered they had edges and bellies and tempers. The forests remembered how to dance. Even mountains remembered that height is a conversation with the sky and stood taller by a whisper. In the days that followed, though days had not yet learned the numerics of calendars, Fujin walked the newborn paths, loosened his sack, and taught the world its delicate verbs. Flutter, sway, whirl, lift, sigh, hush. He braided breezes through bamboo so that their hollow hearts could sing. He skimmed thin drafts along the back of a swallow's wing and taught it what it meant to ride. He mapped the secret corridors inside hot afternoons where farmers would later lift their hats to the cool. On the high slopes, he stitched narrow, invisible roads that climbers would one day call currents. And in the low fields, he laid the long, patient breath that rice plants would name growth. For every gift of motion, Raijin cast a voice. He found in thunder a language made of distances made close. He set his drums in a circle and spoke to the sky until the sky learned to answer, first gently, then with praise. He made the rain practice its approaches, a patter like children's feet in temple courtyards, a cascade like conversations at summer markets, a downpour like drums teaching the earth to dance. When lightning wanted a name, he traced it on the undersides of clouds, bright characters, swift and beautiful, that faded as quickly as they appeared, leaving memory to glow in the eyes of those who had seen them. With each lesson, the world learned it had a pulse. People felt it even before they had words for weather. A grandmother sitting at the threshold of her house would say, "Hush," and a breeze would come to cool the stew. A fisherman would look at the underside of clouds and know it was time to bring nets in. A child would lift a ribbon to the wind and hear a drum a moment before the rain. They did not yet call the teachers by their names, but they lived in the days those names were writing. One evening, if evening is the right word for the hour when the light leaned westward and found itself slightly less attached to the land, Fujin climbed a high ridge where pines stood in the pose of scholars. Raijin followed, drums swaying at his hips. They looked out across everything they had taught and everything still waiting to be taught. The sea wore 1,000 small lamps of reflected sky. The fields were soft with sighing. The distant mountains chewed on shadows. "It is good," said Raijin, and the winds repeated, Good. As if trying the syllable on leaves. It is new, said Fujin, and the thunder repeated nothing. For some words are meant to be kept quiet in the bones. Below them, a small village, no more than a handful of roofs and a path, made ready for sleep. Smoke curled from a few cooking fires. A woman set out bowls of water to catch the nocturnal hush. A boy, the kind who would later be called a poet without knowing why, climbed onto the roof with a string and a small drum his grandfather had carved. He held the string up and watched how the wind held it steady, then let it fall, then lifted it again. He tapped the drum once, and the hill he sat on seemed to answer with a little hollow in its chest. He tapped twice. The hollow answered twice. He smiled. "They are listening," he whispered. Fujin noticed and smiled, the sort of smile no one sees but everyone feels. Like the sudden ease that comes to a room when a window is opened. "Tomorrow I will teach the wind to carry laughter," he said. "Then I will teach the thunder to carry stories," Raijin said. "Because laughter likes to arrive with something to sit inside." That night, a new thought drifted among the clouds. Perhaps motion and voice, breath and drum, were not only for waking the world but also for weaving kinship. The thought lingered like a small lantern hanging from the eaves of sleep. Not all motion is gentle. Even the kindest winds have teeth they keep tucked away, lest the world grow listless and forget to bow. Fujin knew this, and Raijin knew it too. Strength, unused, grows hungry, prowls. On the fourth day, if we insist on counting, they went to the northern cliffs, where the sea had begun to practice roughness against the stone, and where birds with crescent wings etched grammar in the air. "Here," said Fujin, "the world asks us a harder question." Raijin stretched his fingers, listening to the chambers inside the clouds. "We will answer carefully." Fujin loosened his sack a little wider. A stronger wind unfurled, banded and bright. Its ropes twisted from the long strands of distance. It struck the cliff face and broke into lace. It threw its arms around the swells and lifted their shoulders. Raijin tapped his drum, not with the eager palm of celebration but with the knuckles of respect. Thunder ran low, deliberate, like the slow hoofbeats of a heavy animal crossing a bridge. The sea rose, tested, roared, and then, finding itself heard, laid down. Power acknowledged becomes patient. Later, when they descended, they found the boy from the village at the foot of the mountain, collecting pine cones into a circle. He looked up, not surprised to see two strangers who seemed somehow related to the sky. "Today the wind pushed my steps when I tried to carry water," the boy said. "But then it turned and took the weight from my shoulders." Fujin crouched, and even the pine needles leaned toward him. Winds are like children, curious, not cruel. They must be taught where to play. "And thunder?" the boy asked, eyes on the drums. "Thunder is a loud heart," said Raijin gently. "It speaks so you will not be alone." The boy nodded, serious. He held out one of the pine cones. "For your journey," he said. Fujin accepted the gift and blew lightly across it. The scales whispered open, freeing a pair of seeds that twirled away like small prayers. "For yours," he replied, and the boy felt in that twirl the map of a path he would one day take beyond the rice fields to a city of paper lanterns and stone bridges, where he would write weather into poems and become known as Sesho, who taught children to listen for wind within ink. But that is for later chapters. As the first season leaned toward itself, toward a shape that would one day be called spring, Fujin and Raijin walked the boundary places. Shorelines, ridgelines, the edges of cloud and forest, the thresholds of houses where sandals rest. They learned that thresholds are where stories prefer to sit, because stories are bridges between what was and what will be. At each threshold they practiced balance. A gust here, a drumbeat there. A warning to fishermen, a blessing to farmers. A lullaby for infants, a cough to wake the careless from sleeping with fire unattended. Balance is a conversation, not a line. It requires presence. One dawn, when mists lay so thick on the river that even reeds lost sight of their own reflections, Fujin stopped. He closed his sack and listened so completely that the world itself stilled to bear the silence with him. In that held breath, he felt something he had not felt since before his arrival. A tug in the center of stillness, a memory of the hush from which both he and Raijin had stepped. But this tug was different, darker along one edge, sharp where it should have been smooth. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly. Raijin narrowed his eyes. A slow electricity ran along the bone bridges of his hands, thoughtful rather than eager. "Like a drumhead pulled too tight," he said. "Something wishes to call, but not to listen." Far to the west, in places the sun paints last, a shadow had found the seam between motion and voice and tried to pry it apart. The shadow was not a creature but a desire, the desire to own what must be shared. It gathered lost winds, bitter and unsung, and taught them to bite without playing. It stole the silence between thunderclaps and filled it with fear. It threaded corners of fields with a hush that made men look at one another and say, "Not tonight," and close their doors a little faster than necessary. Seeds sown under that hush hesitated to sprout. Fujin tightened his grip on the sack. He had made winds to carry laughter, and winds to cool the old, and winds to spin prayer flags into whispers that could circle a mountain and come home full. He did not wish to make winds that carried wounds. Raijin touched the rim of his largest drum and shook his head. "If we shout," he said, "it will shout back. Then we will answer without anger," said Fujin. "And teach the shadow if it can be taught." They set their feet toward the west. As they walked, the boy from the village, now with a reed flute tucked into his belt, watched them go from a distance. He saw how the pines leaned after them, how the river veiled their ankles with mist as if blessing their steps, how even the crows kept a respectful silence. He did not know where the brothers were going, but he felt in his breath that the world had reached the edge of its first song and was ready to learn the chorus. On the last hill before the far lowlands, Fujin paused and looked back. The sea glowed like hammered silver, the fields like brushed silk, the villages breathed in braided sleep. He held up the pine cone the boy had given him. "We will not lose what we have woken," he promised softly, to the winds, to the thunder, to the boy, to the stillness that had once carried them and could carry them again if needed. Raijin set his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Then let us walk the path of the wind," he said, "and lay our drums along it so others can follow if we falter." And so they went on into a horizon filming itself with cloud. The first breath had been given. The first drum had spoken. Between them, the world had discovered it could move and sing. But beyond the hills, a hush waited with its edges sharpened. It listened, not like a student ready to learn, but like a thief watching a door. The brothers stepped toward it, not with fear, but with the careful kindness of those who intend to teach without breaking what they love. The wind rose gentle. The sky held its voice. Somewhere behind them, in a small village, a reed flute tried its first notes and found them good. The horizon darkened, not suddenly, but as if a hand were drawing a curtain woven from dusk and dust. The brothers walked westward beneath a sky that forgot its light, where even birds hesitated to speak. The hush that had been their birthright now moved against them, no longer patient, no longer listening. Fujin loosened his sack only slightly, hoping to soothe the tremble in the air. The wind that came out was strange, too sharp around its edges, too eager to run. It scraped along the cliffs and tore bark from trees that had never known harm. The grass bowed not in greeting but in defense. Raijin watched with furrowed brow, his drums silent. "It listens no longer to rhythm," he murmured. "It only remembers noise." Fujin nodded. "Something has taught it fear, and fear moves faster than wisdom." They reached a valley carved between two sleeping mountains. Once, streams had sung there, but now only thin dust danced where water had fled. The air was swollen with old murmurs, the echoes of prayers half forgotten, offerings never claimed. A hollow wind curled through the ruins of a shrine, brushing faded paper charms that whispered against each other like restless ghosts. Upon a stone plinth lay what remained of a statue, its face smoothed away by years of unanswered weather. Fujin touched it gently. The stone was warm, but not from the sun. "The shadow is close," he said. Then the thunder spoke. Not Raijin's thunder, but something raw and unshaped. It rolled across the valley like a wound. The clouds gathered, swirling backward, pulled by unseen hands. Lightning cracked, not downward toward the earth, but sideways, as if searching for an enemy. And from that twisting seam of sky, a figure stepped forth. It had no body at first, only smoke, framed by flashes of inverted lightning. When the light steadied, the brothers saw a shape clothed in torn wind, its eyes hollow but filled with stormlight. Its voice came as a rasp of dry air over broken reeds. "I am the silence between," it said. "I am what remains when breath forgets its purpose." Raijin raised his hand toward his drums. "You are not born of sound," he said. "You are what steals it." "I am what you left behind," hissed the shadow. "The stillness you broke when you first spoke to the sky. You gave the world motion, and in that motion you left no room for rest. Fujin's eyes softened, though the wind around him swelled. There is no motion without rest. You have forgotten that stillness is not the same as silence. The shadow's smile cracked like frozen water. Then teach me, wind. Teach me what your voice has taken. It lunged. The valley erupted into chaos. Winds colliding, thunder twisting upon itself. Fujin spun his sack in a wide circle, pulling the air back into order. But the corrupted gusts tore at him, whispering words he had never taught them. Envy, hunger, loneliness. Each gust carried a memory of something unbalanced, some promise never fulfilled. Raijin struck his drums, summoning deep thunder to counter the shrieking gale. The sound rolled through the clouds like the heartbeat of a mountain. Lightning split the sky, carving pathways for the lost winds to escape. For a moment the world remembered its rhythm. But the shadow was cunning. It fed on every echo, growing heavier, darker. The very sound of thunder thickened around it, smothered by its hunger for silence. Raijin felt the weight pressing against his chest, stealing the breath between his beats. "Brother," he called. Fujin turned, eyes narrowed. He took a deep breath, the first breath of the world, still living in his lungs, and released it as a single command. Enough! The command struck through the storm like dawn breaking glass. The shadow shuddered, its form scattering into ribbons of cold mist. The valley trembled, the clouds recoiled, and the dust fell in silence once more. But victory came at a cost. The winds lay exhausted, their songs faint. Fujin's sack hung limp, drained of motion. Raijin's drums smoked where thunder had burned too long. They stood among the quiet ruins, their breath heavy. Raijin spoke first. "It cannot be destroyed, only reminded." Fujin nodded. "Then we must remind the world, too, that stillness and motion are not enemies, but partners in the dance." They repaired the shrine, stone by stone, word by word. Fujin carved new charms from reeds and set them fluttering where the wind could read them. Raijin tapped a gentle rhythm upon the wood, inviting rain back to the valley. When the first drops fell, the dust sighed, and a small stream began to hum once more. From that day, it was said that when thunder sounds after long silence, it is Raijin calling Fujin home. Two brothers remembering their promise to the world. And yet, far beyond the valley, beyond the reach of their mending, the silence between gathered itself again. Not as shadow this time, but as rumor. A whisper in the hearts of men who hoarded breath and hoarded words. The storm had learned its name, and names once known do not easily fade. The world exhaled slowly, unsure of itself. The storm had passed, yet its echo remained, like a memory trapped inside the bones of the air. The valleys still trembled with the pulse of what had been. A whisper of thunder, a sigh of wind. Above, clouds moved as if recovering from dreams they could not remember. Fujin and Raijin rested on a ridge where dawn spilled like honey over stone. Their faces were quiet, but their silence carried weight. For the first time since the world's beginning, the brothers had met something that did not wish to dance. It wished only to unmake. Raijin ran a hand across one of his drums, its skin charred around the edges. "Thunder does not like to be still," he said softly. "When it waits too long, it forgets its kindness." Fujin opened his sack a little and let out a breath of cool wind that moved gently across the burnt drum. The charred edges softened, whispering thanks. "Even thunder needs to rest," Fujin replied. "But rest should never be mistaken for silence. Silence is what feeds the shadow." They looked west, where the horizon still held the bruise of their battle. "The silence between will not sleep forever," said Raijin. "It will find another mouth to speak through. Then we will teach the world how to listen," Fujin said. The brothers journeyed eastward to a small village where the wind hummed unevenly and the sky was heavy with unshed rain. The people there moved quietly, their eyes downcast. Every door was shut, every fire small. When the brothers entered, no one spoke. They heard only the clinking of bowls, the rustle of straw. Even the dogs did not bark. Raijin frowned. "Do they not hear us?" "They hear," said Fujin, "but fear has taken the sound of their hearts." They stopped before an old man sitting beside a temple bell that had not been rung in years. The bell's bronze skin was dull, its mouth filled with dust. Fujin bowed. "Elder, why has your bell forgotten its voice?" The man looked up, his eyes cloudy with years. "Once we rang it for rain and it came. We rang it for harvest and it came. But one night the wind brought screams instead. A storm that did not speak, it only took. So we learned to be quiet." Raijin knelt beside the bell and tapped it gently with his fingers. The sound that came was hollow, uncertain. "You gave your silence to fear," he said, "and fear has made a home in your air." The old man trembled. "If we ring it again, will the shadow return?" Fujin smiled, the kind of smile that calms thunder. "Not if you ring it with love." That night, the brothers stood on the temple steps as villagers gathered, hesitant. Fujin motioned to the children. "You will ring the bell first," he said. A small girl stepped forward, her hands shaking. She struck the bell lightly. The sound that came was thin but clear, a trembling note that hung in the air like a fragile bird. Raijin raised one drum. "Now we answer." He struck once, deep and slow. The bell's voice deepened. Clouds rolled back from the sky, not in fear, but in recognition. Fujin loosed a single breath, weaving the sound of the bell and drum together. The wind carried the tone across the village, through the rice fields, over the river, and into the hills beyond. Houses shuddered not from destruction, but from awakening. The people lifted their heads and felt the pulse return to the air. Rain began to fall, soft, deliberate, like fingers counting blessings. The villagers laughed, startled by their own voices. The sound of laughter rose like incense. "The world remembers its song," said Raijin. "And songs remember their singers," replied Fujin. After the rain, they climbed to the mountain above the village, where the clouds gathered thick and white. There, Raijin laid his drums in a circle. "I will teach the sky to echo itself," he said. He struck the first drum, low thunder rolled. He struck the second. Lightning flashed and curved like a calligrapher's brushstroke. Each strike awakened another tone, another hue. The clouds began to shimmer with light, reflecting gold, violet, and indigo. Fujin walked among them, guiding the air so that every beat folded perfectly into rhythm. The wind carried the thunder's echo outward, shaping it into harmony. For the first time, thunder and wind did not merely coexist. They composed. Below, villagers stood outside their homes, watching lightning dance across the heavens like music given form. The temple bell chimed by itself, moved by breath and echo. Raijin smiled. "Now even the sky has a memory." "Yes," said Fujin. "And memory, once sung, becomes prayer." As dawn approached, Fujin looked toward the far horizon again. The clouds there were quiet, but he felt something waiting, some remnant of the silence between. "It still listens," he said. Raijin nodded. "Let it listen. We will teach it our song until it learns to hum." He placed one of his smaller drums beside the temple bell. "When thunder is far away, strike this. It will call me." Fujin tied a ribbon from his sack to the bell's handle. "And when the air feels heavy, untie this. The wind will come." The old man bowed deeply. "You have given us sound again." Fujin smiled. "No, we only reminded you that it was never gone." That night, the brothers watched the stars appear like sparks from Raijin's drums. Fujin spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder what will become of us when the world learns to move without our guidance?" Raijin chuckled. "Then we will rest. The wind will blow through other hands, and the thunder will echo in other hearts." They sat until dawn, listening to the newborn rhythm of the earth, the pulse of balance, steady and kind. And far away in the western mists, the silence between listened to, curious for the first time. It did not yet understand, but it no longer hungered. It waited, as students do, for the next lesson. For many seasons the world remembered its song. The wind played along the rivers like fingers on a harp. The thunder answered softly from distant hills, and rain fell in verses instead of storms. Villages thrived, their bells chiming not for warning but for joy. Children learned to read the sky the way monks read scripture, through breath and rhythm. But songs, even the kind that hold the world together, fade if not sung. And silence, when dressed in beauty, can return as comfort. It began quietly, as all endings do. The fishermen stopped listening for the wind before casting nets. Farmers no longer looked up to greet the clouds. Even the temple bells were struck less often. Their tones grew faint, then thin, then vanished between one dawn and the next. Fujin felt it first, an emptiness in the currents, a breath missing from the rhythm of things. He stood upon the sea cliffs and opened his sack. The air that came out was heavy and stale, like something that had forgotten how to move. Raijin joined him, his drum silent at his side. It feels as if the world has exhaled and refused to breathe again. The silence between has changed its shape, said Fujin. It hides now within peace itself. They traveled to the same village where once the bell had sung with laughter. It was dusk when they arrived, and every window glowed faintly with lamplight. Yet the air felt wrong, too smooth, too perfect. No wind stirred the grass, no insects hummed, no rain teased the horizon. When they entered the temple courtyard, they found the bell gone. In its place hung a sphere of polished metal, shining yet lifeless. The elders replaced it, said a child's voice. A young boy emerged from the shadows, the grandson of the girl who had first struck the bell years ago. They said the old one made too much noise. This one looks prettier. Raijin frowned. Prettier, but it does not speak. Fujin placed his hand upon the sphere. It was smooth as ice, and deep within it he could hear faint whispers, not of prayer, but of fear hidden behind quiet smiles. The silence between has learned vanity, he said. It has found that the still heart of man is easier to rule than the wild sky. They turned to leave, but as they stepped beyond the temple gate, a wind rose from nowhere. Cold, circular, wrong. Coiled through the air like smoke without fire. Raijin's drums began to hum on their own, strings vibrating from unseen pressure. It is here. From the wind, a figure unfolded. Not the torn shadow from before, but something smooth and radiant, wearing the light of calm seas and the grace of empty shrines. Have you missed me? It asked, voice as gentle as sleep. You gave the world motion, and they grew weary of it. Now they come to me to rest. Fujin's eyes darkened. Rest without renewal is decay. Decay? The figure smiled. No. I offer peace. Your storms exhaust them. My silence embraces them. They pray now not to the wind, but to the absence of it. Raijin lifted a drum. Peace without sound is not peace. It is forgetting. The silence spread its arms, and the air itself stopped trembling. Trees froze mid-sway. Rivers held their breath. Even clouds seemed to pause in their drifting. Then let them forget, it whispered. They are tired of your noise. Fujin could not breathe. His own air turned to glass within his chest. He tried to open his sack, but the threads refused to move. No wind obeyed him. Raijin struck his drum, no sound came. He struck again, harder. The thunder coiled inside the skin but would not break free. The silence stepped closer, smiling softly. You see? Even gods grow quiet in time. All things wish to end in stillness. Fujin fell to one knee. If you take sound from the sky, he gasped. You take life from the earth. The silence knelt beside him. Life is noisy, it said, and I am tired. Then, for the first time, Fujin understood. This was not merely an enemy. It was a reflection, the world's own wish for rest taken too far, a kindness turned inward until it smothered itself. He looked up. Then rest, old friend. But not here. not where hearts still beat. Raijin, sensing the moment, lifted his final drum. A small one carved from cedar, its rim etched with lightning sigils. He pressed his palm to its surface, and instead of striking, he whispered into it, "Asterisk, remember." Asterisk. The drum trembled once. A single note escaped, soft but real. It traveled outward, trembling through the stillness, carrying not thunder but breath. The frozen trees quivered, rivers remembered to flow, the clouds sighed. Fujin opened his sack. A single gust escaped, circling the drum, lending it strength. Together they created a tone the world had never heard. Not storm, not song, but something between. The sound of balance awakening. The silence screamed, not in rage, but in fear of vanishing. Its smooth body cracked, and within the cracks flickered fragments of every prayer it had swallowed. The brothers reached out, each taking one fragment, and placed them into the sky like stars. When the last piece faded, the silence was gone. Not destroyed, only transformed into the spaces between wind and thunder, where it could rest without ruling. Rain began to fall, slow and silver. The villagers stepped outside, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. Children ran through puddles, their laughter echoing against the temple walls. Raijin watched them and smiled faintly. "Do you think it will return again?" Fujin tied a new ribbon to the temple gate. "Of course, the world forgets easily. That is why we must remind it, not through storm, but through care." He looked to the horizon, where new clouds were gathering, not in warning, but in promise. Raijin lifted his drum and tapped once, softly. The sound rolled through the sky like a heartbeat returning after too much quiet. Fujin breathed deeply, the first full breath since the world had gone still. "Then let the silence rest," he said. "We will keep it company, but never let it rule." And so the wind stirred again, gentle and sure. The balance returned, fragile but alive. In the spaces between sound and stillness, the world learned to breathe once more. The rain did not stop for 3 days and nights, yet it was not a flood. It was renewal. Grass rose greener. Rivers sang clearer. Villagers learned to speak softly again, not from fear, but reverence. Every droplet seemed to carry a memory of thunder and a sigh of wind, a promise that the world was still awake. On the fourth dawn, Fujin and Raijin stood on a ridge above the valley. The air was clear enough to see the sea shimmering like liquid glass. Between the waves, small eddies of mist curled and danced. Even the clouds looked alive. "The world breathes again," said Raijin. Fujin nodded. "It remembers how." They smiled, weary but content. Yet beneath that peace, both felt it. A pulse deeper than wind or thunder, something stirring far below the earth. A rhythm that did not belong to either of them. It began as a vibration in the soles of their feet, faint but insistent. The sky dimmed slightly, and the wind faltered, not stopped, but hesitated, as though listening for something older than itself. Raijin crouched, pressing his ear to the ground. The earth throbbed like a distant drum. "Not mine," he murmured. "Something else is calling." Fujin's hair lifted slightly in the still air. The mountains breathe. Perhaps they wish to join the song. They followed the trembling southward, to a place where cliffs folded into themselves and clouds pooled like sleeping giants. There, among jagged ridges, they found a chasm wide as the sky's own mouth. From its depths rose heat, steady, rhythmic, like a hidden heart. "The storms above have taught the world to speak," said Fujin. "Now the fire below seeks its verse." Raijin grinned. "Then let it dance with us." They descended into the chasm. The air grew dense, thick with the scent of stone and molten dreams. Beneath them, rivers of magma pulsed with light, not angry, but eager. Raijin set his drums down on a ledge. Fujin stood beside him, sack open, feeling the draft of deep air rising from the earth's veins. "Let's teach it rhythm," said Raijin. He struck his drums once. The sound rolled down into the molten river, echoing in the hollows below. The magma shimmered and swirled, responding with a low hum that vibrated in their bones. Fujin exhaled into his sack, guiding the sound upward. The wind caught the fire's hum and wove it into a spiral. From that spiral rose something new. Not mere flame, not mere breeze, but a living storm of heat and breath. It rose into the air like a dancer made of sunlight and ash. Around it, the cavern glowed red and gold. The figure spun, arms outstretched, trailing ribbons of molten air. "What are you?" whispered Raijin, awe in his voice. The being turned its head, eyes of ember, smile of dawn. "I am what happens when fire learns to move." Fujin bowed. "Then you are welcome to our dance." For the first time since the world's beginning, wind, thunder, and fire moved together. Raijin struck his drums, and lightning ran along the cavern walls. Fujin loosed a gale that curved the bolts into graceful arcs. The fire being swirled between them, its body becoming a melody of flame. The cavern itself began to pulse in time, each rock beating like a heart. The air above the earth rippled. The clouds miles away began to spin, responding to the rhythm below. Outside, the villagers looked to the sky and saw colors they had never seen. Spirals of blue fire, gold wind, violet thunder. The earth itself sang, and the rain turned to steam. Yet in the beauty there was warning. The song was too strong, too full. The world trembled, unable to contain it. "Brother!" shouted Fujin. "We must temper it. It will break the balance." Raijin nodded, striking a single, sharp beat. A command, not an invitation. The fire being slowed, looking at them with sadness. "You awaken me, then bid me sleep?" Fujin's voice was soft. "Even music must rest between notes." The being bowed. "Then I will sleep in your storms, and rise when you call me." With that, it dissolved into sparks. The cavern's glow faded to embers. The rhythm eased. Above, The sky calmed, though faint streaks of color lingered like painted memory. Back on the ridge, Fujin and Raijin watched the last traces of fire retreat beneath the clouds. "Did we do right?" Raijin asked. "To give it life, only to take it back?" Fujin looked at his empty sack. "We did not take it. We gave it patience." He turned to the horizon where the sea met the storm. "One day men will call that dance lightning. They will call it beauty and fear it too. But both are correct." Raijin smiled. "Then the dance continues, even without us." The brothers stood in silence, listening as wind brushed through distant trees, as thunder rolled softly beyond the mountains. In the valley below, a small child, the great-grandchild of the girl who once struck the bell, sat by the river and watched the clouds. She clapped her hands twice, and a tiny gust swirled around her, carrying the faintest spark of light. She laughed. Raijin chuckled. "It seems our lessons have good students." "Good," said Fujin, "because one day the dance will need them." They turned from the ridge, walking into the mist, not as masters of storm, but as its caretakers, leaving behind a world that would remember them every time wind kissed thunder and rain met flame. That night, as stars trembled awake, the sky hummed with the memory of their dance. The earth, warm and grateful, whispered a vow to keep their rhythm alive. And somewhere, deep within the clouds, thunder smiled, not as a roar, but as a breath. The world had learned not only to move and sing, but to dance. The world had grown quiet again, but this quiet was different. It was not the silence of fear, nor the emptiness of forgetting. It was the pause between heartbeats, the sacred stillness that allows the next note to begin. Fujin stood on a cliff overlooking the endless sea. The wind moved through his hair like memory. Raijin stood beside him, the rims of his drums gleaming with morning light. "It feels like the first day again," Raijin said. "Every ending is the first day," Fujin replied. "We only change which breath we begin with." Below them, the sea shimmered with all the colors of the world. Silver where clouds touched, gold where light broke through, indigo where depth hid its stories. Between waves, a gentle hum rose, the sound of water breathing. "The world has learned," said Raijin. "It sings without our hand now." "Then our work is nearly done," said Fujin. They walked together to the valley where once the temple bell had rung. The village had changed, new homes, new faces, but the ribbon Fujin had tied still fluttered from the gate, though its color had faded to the pale shade of memory. A group of children ran through the courtyard chasing paper kites painted with storms. The kites danced, spinning and weaving like small echoes of the gods who had once shaped the sky. One boy stopped and stared at them. "You look like the statues in the old temple," he said shyly. Raijin grinned. "Perhaps the statues look like us." The boy handed them a reed flute. "Play something," he said. "My grandfather says the wind listens when you do." Fujin took the flute and placed it to his lips. When he blew, no melody came, only a soft breath. But the air caught it, carried it upward, and in that faint sound, thunder rolled gently from the horizon. The children laughed, covering their ears in delight. The flute shimmered, glowing faintly before fading back to simple wood. Fujin handed it back. "Now it remembers you," he said. Night came slowly, draped in violet clouds. The brothers climbed once more to the ridge, their favorite place between heaven and earth. Raijin struck his drums lightly, not to summon storms, but to listen. Each beat rolled across the sky and came back as a whisper of stars. "They answer softer now," he said. "They don't need to shout anymore," Fujin replied. "The world knows its name." The wind moved in wide circles, touching mountain, forest, and sea each with care. For every tree that bent, a thunder replied in kindness. Far to the west, lightning flashed once, like a slow heartbeat. It was not warning, it was gratitude. "Do you think they'll remember us?" asked Raijin quietly. "They already do," said Fujin, nodding toward the horizon. "Every breath that moves a leaf, every laugh that rises before rain, that's us. We were never meant to be remembered as names, only as motion." As dawn approached, the brothers stood together one last time. The air was full of the colors of their dance. Pale blue for calm, gold for balance, crimson for memory. Fujin opened his sack wide. From within came all the winds the world had ever known. Mountain drafts, sea breezes, whispers from temple doors, sighs of lovers, cries of newborns, even the breath of dying stars. Raijin lifted his hands and struck his largest drum once. The sound did not echo. It expanded, filling the sky, the sea, and every quiet place between. Wind and thunder merged, two voices, one heart. The sound was not loud. It was infinite. Clouds spun in slow spirals. Rivers lifted from their beds and fell again as rain. Forests bowed, deserts sang, mountains exhaled dust and light. Every creature, from bird to whale to man, felt it, that pulse, that rhythm, that reminder. The world is alive because it moves. The brothers looked at each other. "It's time," said Raijin. "Yes," said Fujin. "The song belongs to them now." They clasped hands, wind swirling around thunder, and stepped forward into the light. The wind scattered, becoming every breath. The thunder lingered, becoming every heartbeat. The world sighed, soft and endless. Sometimes, on nights when rain comes without warning, villagers say they hear laughter between the thunder. Sometimes, in early dawn, a sudden breeze will lift a child's kite even when the air is still. They call it the path of the wind. Others call it the song of the drums. But those who truly listen know it is both. The eternal breath that moves through all things. It has no name now. It needs none. Because when wind and thunder meet, the world remembers how to begin again. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth. May the breath of Fujin and Raijin guide your dreams tonight, and every night you remember to breathe.